And the first item on the agenda is Community Engagement Plan. Mr. Fana?
Well, good morning, everyone. It's one of those Tuesdays that feels like a Monday to me, but I'm sure it does to everybody. So we're going to talk a little bit about community engagement. It's an issue that we've been discussing for a while amongst ourselves internally and also with City Commission. And it's an issue that a lot of communities around the country have struggled with. Dialogues between the governments at all levels and citizens has been morphing over the years. Social media has played a huge role. And just a political discourse that we've had in our country has played a role. And so a lot of communities have looked at how do we better engage with our citizens and how do we have constructive conversations and how do we get feedback without it being a back and forth struggle. And so we're looking at this issue and we're going to present to you some challenges and some options that we can look at in the future to better engage and get feedback from our citizens. And we brought a special guest to do so, to at least to start it off, to kick it off, and that's Doug Sarno. And he is a consultant who's been doing this all over the country and helping some cities get their community engagement efforts off the ground. And there's been a few cities that have started in the past couple of years, but it's something that's kind of in its infancy, and we're at the forefront, I would say, in Florida. I haven't seen a lot of cities that are really looking at a kind of a more structured effort on doing community engagement. I think we're one of the first in Florida. So with that, I'll bring Doug up to give you an introduction.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Really appreciate being here, and I know your time is valuable. I'm trying to cram about a week-long course into 15 minutes and really talk about some of the things that I've been talking to your staff about and some of the things that we're talking all around the country about in terms of how do we sort of reinvent how we engage our citizens and how we engage our communities in a more constructive and effective way. And I'm going to use public meetings as sort of a metaphor for some of the challenges we face in engaging our community, and then talk about some of the best practices that we employ in the practice of public participation to sort of rethink and reinvent some of this stuff. Let me just, by introduction, I'm a recovering civil engineer. I went to engineering school. I got out of engineering school. I went to work right away doing work on big public projects. And we would always get to this place in the project where everybody really just hated our guts, right? They were just angry and upset, and how could you make that decision, and why are you making that decision? And my engineering brethren would always look at the team and say, you know, it's a people problem. Don't worry about it. As if we could just get rid of all the people, we'd have no problem, right? And it occurred to me that that was probably not the best path forward, and that we had to figure out a better way to engage people, a better way to engage our communities and think about this stuff. And so for the last 30 years, that's what I've been doing. I really kind of transitioned my career away from the technical, more toward the process, more toward the idea of how do you engage people constructively. How do you make group decision-making work? So I do it both in the communities and in organizations. And I'm going to share some of that with you and reflect on sort of my 30 years, but also where the best practice is right now in this field of public participation. We've been holding public meetings for a really long time. This is the oldest announcement I could find on Google, but I know we've been doing it a lot longer than that. August 1853. Come on over to the saloon and let's talk about what's going on in the community. Fortunately, we wised up and we no longer hold things in saloons. Our public meetings might look a little different, but the thing is they still don't work. And the reason they don't work is because they're not good practice, right? Public meetings would never be something, the traditional public meeting is never something that somebody in our field of public participation, public engagement, civic engagement would design on purpose. Right? So most of us have these kind of terrible experiences at public meetings. And the reason is because they're not really designed to be good public participation. And I'm going to explain and talk about that as we move through this today. And the thing about it is a bad meeting is it's more than just a bad night, right? You walk out of these angry public meetings, everybody's upset, and you think, well, I'm glad that's over. But it's not really over. Right? It has lasting ramifications for you and for your community. Right? you've lost trust. Your community has lost trust with you. They've lost trust with each other. You've created misunderstanding and miscommunication in community. Lots of stuff got said and put on the table that isn't even true. But nobody ever sorts through the facts, right? So that just sits there in your community as a muddled mess of information. We've damaged our relationship with our communities, and the communities have damaged their relationships with each other, right? Their interconnections and their working relationship with each other. We've lost credibility with them, and most importantly, we've lost the goodwill we need. We've damaged the goodwill we need to make civic engagement work, to make our ability to work with our communities and our citizens work. So there's a lot of reasons why public meetings fail. And I'm going to talk about 7 key things that I see all the time that are a reason that some of our public meetings don't fail. And then I'm going to juxtapose those with some best practices from the field of public participation to talk about how to think about this maybe a little differently than we think about it now. So reason number 1, everybody's already taken a position, including you, right? By the time we get to most traditional public meetings, the decision's already made. If you think about your decision process, right, and the way you move through your decision process, you spend often years of detailed research and analysis. You clearly define the problem. You talk about what criteria we need to meet to make this successful. We gather information and data. We create options. We thoroughly analyze those options, right? We make a choice or a preferred choice, and then finally we make our ultimate decision. And the thing about it is, in public participation, we tend to put all our energy right here, right? This spot where we have a proposal. Basically, we've made up our minds. We kid ourselves that we haven't, right? We say we're open to new information, and to some degree, it's true we are. We're asking the public for input. But the truth of the matter is, by this point, we have spent a lot of time and a lot of money. And we have deadlines looming, and we have to move forward. And so we're not open to our public kind of suddenly saying and opening up a whole new can of worms and saying, hey, we don't like that at all, and here's all the reasons why, and that sort of thing, right? So we need to rethink how we do that, and because this is just really begging for a fight, right? Everybody's drawing their line in the sand. They're just coming to yell at you. We're creating a soapbox for people to yell at us and to be on the news or social media now. Right? So best practice says don't start your public participation there, or at least don't put all the majority of your effort there. Start earlier and set really clear expectations for your communities about what it is we're doing and what role the community can play in that process. We need to put a lot more effort right up front, particularly in defining the problem so that we all share the problem we're trying to solve. There is no way we as a community are going to arrive at a common understanding of solutions if we don't even have a common understanding of the problem or the challenge that we're facing. Right? We also have to put a lot more effort into defining our criteria, and that criteria needs to be infused with shared community values, such that we understand what's important to our community and we reflect to them that we understand what's important to our community. The most important words in a public participation process is, we heard you, and here's what we did with it. Right? And so this is one of the most important places to have that sense of, we heard you. Right? We heard what's most important to you. Because if we wait till we're down there, all we get are positions. If we start here, we can talk about values, we can talk about interests, we can talk about things that allow us to make better decisions. We'll talk about that more in a few minutes. And we need to integrate public participation into our decision making, not just do one meeting at one point. Right? This is a journey we go on, a journey of learning and understanding and deep knowledge building, and we need to bring the public along that journey with us. Right? And make sure they understand what's going on and why. We need to communicate more and more often so we're bringing them on that journey with us. And understanding for us and for them, where can public input actually make the most difference on our decision making. Right? And it's often not there at the penultimate moment of the project. It's often much earlier, where we really can hear and listen and do something with the input we get. And we need to think about public input not just as something we have to react to, but as actual data in our project. It's actually going to help us make better decisions. Ultimately, the frame I'm trying to paint here, and the frame we look at public participation in from the field of engagement, is one of decision-making. We engage the public to make better decisions. We engage them so that their input informs us and helps us think critically about the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. One of the things we have to recognize is that public participation must provide a real opportunity for impact. We can't promise exactly how much impact they're going to have or exactly what we're going to listen to, but we can promise that we are going to listen and we are going to take it into account. There's a real opportunity for input. That's very different than public relations, where our goal is to communicate, to explain, and often to get buy-in, to get people to agree with the decision we've made and to help them understand why the decision was made, right? But there's no room for them to influence the decision, or there's very little room for them to influence the decision. So we're more in a buy-in environment. If you're doing buy-in, you're not doing public participation. So we have to really look at ourselves in the mirror and think about which one are we doing. It's not that buy-in is bad. Sometimes that's where we are, right? There's no real room for public input. That's okay. There's legitimate reasons for that, but we have to be honest about that and be clear about that. But if we're truly asking for input, we have to be serious and we have to be sincere. There is nothing more frustrating in a community than to be asked their opinion and for that opinion to be just completely disregarded or never have had a chance to be considered in the first place. Right? So the international community, there is actually an organization called the International Association for Public Participation. We do a week-long training, and many of your staff went through that training about a year ago, and we did a refresher course this December. They've created something called the IAP2 spectrum. And the IAP2 spectrum tells us that not all public participation is the same. You really have to think hard about what you're trying to achieve through engaging your public before you go out and start talking to the public about your project or making promises or setting expectations. And the spectrum says, look, there's different levels of public participation, and it goes from zero opportunity for impact on the decision to total opportunity for impact on the decision. At the informed level, no opportunity for impact. Our goal is simply to let people know what's going on. At the empower level, we're actually empowering the community. We're saying, tell us what you want and we'll implement it. Right? So this is not public participation. This is something we rarely do, and when we do it, we often don't do it that well. Where we work is in the middle. We work at this consult, involve, and collaborate levels of public participation. Consult meaning we're going to check in with you at 1 or 2 points in this process. We're going to ask you what you think, and we're going to use that input as we make our decision, right? We're just consulting. We're checking in. We're asking you for some input. At Involve, we're inviting you to join us in the process, to sit down at the table with us. We're not promising agreement seeking or any level of consensus building, right? But we're going to bring you along the journey, and there will be multiple places where we ask for your input, right? We're involving you in the whole process. At Collaborate, we're saying we're going to work together, right? We are going to promise some level of at least trying to find common ground at some or even multiple points in this process. And we're really saying this is a partnership as we move forward. We're trying to collaborate. So you can see, if you're thinking about engaging your community, there's a huge difference between consult and collaborate, a huge difference. And we need to be clear what we're doing. We internally have to set clear goals for ourselves. Why are we engaging the public, and what do we hope to get from public involvement and public input on this project? This is different from the goals of our project. This is the goals of working with the public on our project. And then once we understand that, we have to make a very clear promise to the public that says to them, here's what you can expect from us. Here's the role we are hoping that you'll play, and here's what you can expect from us as we consider your input and engage with you through this process. Here's the problem. If you don't make a clear promise to the public, if you don't set very clear expectations, then you're allowing the public to set the expectations about the project. And they're all going to set different expectations. And all their expectations are going to be way higher than you intend to run your project. And they're going to judge the success of your program not against what you actually achieve, but what they were expecting. So we have to get much better at the expectations game and the clarity game as we move through this. Okay, reason number 2, everybody hates public speaking, including most of your staff, right? People don't like doing what I'm doing right now, right? They don't like standing at the microphone. Sometimes you'll go at a public meeting and you'll see people, they're literally shaking at the microphone. They're so scared. Now, the sort of good news is that public speaking used to be at the top of every list of what people fear the most. It is no longer there. And you're not going to like what's replaced it. What's replaced public speaking is corrupt government officials. I had to read that 3 times before I thought that they were serious. That is what people reporting fearing the most in polls now. So that doesn't really help you, but it's an interesting thing. But public speaking is still something people really scared of, right? It's way above other really serious fears like flying, zombies, clowns, right? People would rather take an airplane ride with a bunch of zombie clowns than stand at a microphone at one of your public meetings. Right? Yet that's what we do for them to be heard. We make them be in an uncomfortable environment, right? And your staff's uncomfortable there too, right? We need to do a better job preparing staff. I'm not letting staff off the hook. We do have to give presentations. We do have to, do that work. But we have to be more conscientious of who we put in front of the room and how comfortable they are there and how well prepared they are to do those things that we need to do to engage our public. So what we talk about a lot in the field is dialogue. We talk about creating environments for dialogue, getting away from the 2 minutes at a microphone or that public speaking environment, but creating really dynamic and comfortable and inviting and even exciting opportunities for people to sit down and talk to each other. Right? So there's a lot of things that happen when you move people into smaller groups and smaller tables and engagement. One is they're much more comfortable. They talk much more from the heart. They're not just yelling at you and trying to make points or score points. They're also talking to each other. They're also listening to each other more. Right? So we want to try to create these more comfortable environments. So dialogue is the opposite of argument. And we spend most of our time in argument. Right? Argument looks like my point, your point, my point, your point, my point, your point, and the whole time you're making your point, all I'm doing is thinking about my next point and how to refute the point you're making. Right? My objective is to win. It's to actually absolutely defeat you. I don't really care that much about facts. It's all about me. It's all about being in a battle, and rudeness and lack of civility is fine. More and more. There's kind of a middle ground, which is discussion conversation, right? I'm still trying to be understood. I'm still trying to push my agenda, but I see you more as having to be convinced, not defeated. Politeness is expected. I will take some time to listen to you. We'll argue a little bit about my stuff, and then we'll argue a little bit about your stuff. I'm a little more open-minded. But when we talk about dialogue, we're talking about crossing a threshold into a place where people are actually listening and hearing each other, right? They recognize that I know you have very different opinions than me, but I value the ability to try to understand what they are and how you got there. There's a sense of collegiality and brotherhood that takes over in a dialogue, right? I'm listening to you not because I'm just waiting for my turn. I'm listening to you because I truly believe that you have something important to say, and I want to understand you. Right? So how do we create those opportunities for dialogue is really important. Reason number 3, public meetings don't work. Nobody's listening because really they've all taken positions, right? So that's where they are and that's where they're staying. We have to move to a place where we're asking better questions. We're asking the right questions. We're focusing on community values and interests. Stop asking your public what they want. This is the worst question you can ask. We keep going out and saying, what do you want? And the truth of the matter is, we can't deliver 90% of what they tell us. And just the act of them telling us or saying these things suggests that it's a possibility. Right? we need to be more careful. We need to frame our projects. We need to set context. We need to set sideboards. We need to understand the legal and regulatory restrictions upon us, and we need to convey those to our community. We need to make sure that we're asking them questions where their input is actually something that can matter and that we are open to. So we have to clarify what's on and off the table. Everybody walks into a room with this huge set of interests. Most people walk into your public meetings, they don't even know what the meeting's about. They just want to talk about what's important to them, right? So if we're going to have an event to talk about something, we have to create context. We have to help people understand this is what this project's about, and even more than that, here's where public input can matter, right? Here's where we're open to and legally able to take public input. And we need to focus on community values, what people believe in and their interests, what they believe they need to protect those values, and get away from the positions. Right? As soon as someone takes a position, they embed their values and interests in that position, and that position becomes a replacement for their values. They don't see the difference between the two. Right? When we create shared values, we can open up a range of options for how to solve it. Right? Because again, it's all about decision making. It's all about getting us to a place where we understand our shared values, we understand what we're trying to achieve, and then we can seek agreement and common ground as we move forward. So don't start at positions. We have to start at values. We have to start earlier in the process. We have to build those shared community values and reflect back to the community what we heard from them, what they all agree is most important, and maybe some of the things they don't agree about what is most important, but there's usually a lot more agreement in values than not, and how we're going to use that to make decisions. Reason number 4, everybody's angry, and civility's gone out the window. It's not your imagination, right? It's worse, right? In fact, a study and work out of GW University likened anger to a public epidemic, saying it contaminates everything from media controversy to road rage to wars to mass shootings. And 93% of Americans recognize incivility is a problem, including 68% in the most recent study, that it's a major problem. This is important to recognize. Your public doesn't want to be in this situation either. They don't like these ugly public meetings either. They don't like yelling at each other either. Right? That's not to say a few don't relish it. They do. Okay? Right? And too often, those are the ones who are showing up at your meeting. And we're mistaking them for the whole community. They're not. So if we want civility, we need to model civility, and we need to expect civility. I've been in these situations for the last 30 years. When you expect it and you hold people to it, remarkably, they'll respond. Right? When you don't hold people to it, when you let bad behavior sit there, everybody goes, oh, I guess that's how I have to behave to be heard. Right? So civility is something we can create and enforce, especially at the local level. I think it's kind of important to define civility, and I'll do it very quickly. And I like this. This came out recently in Psychology Today. They talked about what is civility, what does civility look like. And I thought this hit the nail on the head, not just for civility, but for how we want our public engagement to work. Civility is people thinking before they speak. It focuses on facts rather than beliefs and opinions. It focuses on the common good rather than individual agendas. We disagree with each other respectfully. We're open to each other without hostility. We respect diverse views and groups. We create a spirit of collegiality. And we offer productive and corrective feedback to those who behave in demeaning, insulting, disrespectful, and discriminatory ways. We don't act in kind, right? We take the high ground, we take the high road, and we move forward accordingly. Anger is something you have to really think about. Also, anger is really just passion turned in the wrong direction. You have to figure out what's at the root of that anger. And in order to figure out what's at the root of that anger, you have to show things that we don't normally show. Empathy, compassion, honesty, and commitment before we prove competence. There's a saying in public participation, I don't care how much you know until I know how much you care. Right? That leads to the fifth thing. Nobody trusts you. They don't trust each other. Credibility is the quality of being trusted and believed in. And government's loss of credibility is actually a word, a phrase used in the dictionary to describe credibility. 29% of Americans view government officials as credible. And only 15% believe that the government's working for them. Right? The response to this is relationship building. Right? You've got to earn trust in today's world. You don't just get it because of your official. And experience isn't enough. You've got to think about the heart and the mind as you go out and do this work. Fully half of the work you need to be doing is around caring and empathy, right? We think our credibility is all based on our capacity for doing good work. It's not. It's how we express it and how we treat people, right? I'm running out of time, so I'm going to quickly move through a couple things. We want to move from this, where every stakeholder thinks they're in an individual negotiation with us, to this, where we start getting people to talk to each other and understand that our job is to make the best decision for the most people, and they have to understand how other people think too. Recognize that people don't understand government, right? Harvard study says that the American education system fails to convey basic civic knowledge to students. It means our adults don't understand civics either. Even worse, 10% of college seniors believe that Judge Judy is on the Supreme Court, right? We have a lot of work to do, right? And we don't think it's our job, but it is our job. We need to teach people civics. We need to teach people that they have both rights and responsibilities as citizens. We keep making them think that we're just the complaint department, right? That they come to public meetings just to yell at us. That is not why we hold public meetings. We hold public meetings to engage people meaningfully in the work of governing. That's the role of public participation. You know, it's hard work. Good governance is hard work. We need to make the best decisions for the most people. Not everybody can get their way. We have to stop telling people what we think they want to hear. We have to start telling them the truth and the challenges that we face. We have to explain how things work. I can't tell you how many times that I get to a point where somebody finally explains something in a way that resonates with the community, and they just go, oh, well, yeah, that makes sense, right? Months, years of anguish and conflict, and suddenly there's a moment where they go, oh, well, why didn't you tell us that before, right? You have to get there to the place where they live and to explain it to them in a way they do. Last reason, your community's not in the room. When you're holding public meetings, you're talking to the same 10 people over and over and over again, and they tend to be the loudest, angriest, most annoying stakeholders you have, right? So you have to think about, how do I reach the whole community? How do I talk to the whole community, right? Our best practice is that your public participation should look like the community that you serve, right? Not just the special interests on the tails of the curve. The general public that's in the middle. Oftentimes, in your public meetings, the public is missing, right? And in fact, what we've taken to start to use the public as a term as if everybody's the same and they all think the same way. But when you say the public, what you're really talking about are the loudest, angriest stakeholders, because those are the people that are in your face constantly. And you've got to broaden that and think about that in a much more substantive way. So finally, in summary, this is a process. It's not a meeting. No one meeting can ever engage your community, right? Your community is an asset to good governance. You're just not hearing from them because you're spending too much time with the usual suspects, right? But the broader community doesn't know how to do this. They don't know how to do this right. So you have to teach them. You have to create processes and ways of helping to engage them. And expect more from them. They will rise to the challenge. The more meaningful opportunity you create, the more reasonable and the more fundamental their input will be. And when you get it right, you're going to get much better decisions as a community moving forward. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. That was probably the best summary of community engagement since I have been involved in the public arena. And what I am going to suggest is that we bring you back, particularly as part of what I wanted to start doing beginning with the new commission, is an onboarding process. I think it's very important for us as commissioners, particularly those who haven't done it before, to get acclimated to this job. You know, a lot of us, I know I did, it's on-the-job training. And so if we can provide tools to help new commissioners when they come on, and even older commissioners as they move on, to help them do their job better. This is an element that I think is absolutely essential. Thank you. I charge Armando and the team to help us as a city become more strategic in our community engagement. I think that will help you as commissioners help us do our jobs better as we are out in the community. And so that is the approach here. We are in the customer service business as commissioners and as publicly elected officials, and so we have to do a better job of providing high-quality customer service to our residents. And so we have to learn, frankly, how to do a better job of engaging them in our decision-making. So this is very helpful, and we do want to get you back for a more extended session. Anyway, Wendy, go ahead.
Thank you, mayors and commission. Thank you for your time this morning. So Doug talked about the external part of this, and we started working as Mayor Muyu's term was ending and Mayor James was coming on, because this was something that was recognized throughout the city and especially on the campaign trail. So my piece of this is working through the internal community engagement piece, because sometimes, turning a city government is like turning the Titanic. It takes a long time, and into an iceberg. So our Office of Community Engagement is the office that's providing the framework and the resources to assist the city in getting this feedback and documenting it, right? As we're out there doing some of this engagement on the golf course, one of the things I'm hearing is that, it's frustrating that we've been doing all these charrettes and all this engagement and all this work, and still, where is that captured anywhere? So that's kind of the task that Armando's given our team to start to gather, so that you guys have the information you need to make these good decisions. So obviously community engagement is fostered by creating partnerships, and there's an internal and external component. Everyone here plays a role. One of the things that we realized is that there's 25 different departments here that are doing engagement, and everybody was doing it their own way. And what that created in the community was a misunderstanding, because when everybody's doing engagement their own way, people didn't know what it was that they were expected to give, the input, how it would be used, whether it would be used, whether it wouldn't be used. So we needed to try to get everybody in the room together and create a framework so that we're all on the same team. Doug came in 2018, and he trained an internal group of folks here. This is your community engagement team. It's Jose Tagle from Neighborhood Coordinator, me, and Kevin Jones, because a lot of the work that we do has been in the community engagement world. We also rely heavily on our communications department, Kathleen's group. And if you can think about it in terms of community engagement and communications being an umbrella over the rest of the departments, the strategy's kind of fed up and out by our two teams. We've created community engagement liaisons in many of the departments in the city that do community engagement. That way, our team of 3 can't do it all, but there's a liaison in each department, and that person is going to be in charge of working with the project managers on initiatives, capital improvement projects, all of those kinds of things. And then if they can handle the community engagement without help from us, great. If not, we'll come up with a strategy. The communications department, the community engagement department, and these liaisons will be sitting down to do that, so that we have that consistent framework going forward. And most of the folks that are community engagement liaisons did the week-long training with Doug that we did in December of 18. Excuse me. So we wanted just to let you know that how we're doing engagement is going to be different. It's going to depend on the actual project, what the requirements are, and that will come when we do the project charter. That's how they do it in engineering and utilities. It may include some capital projects. It may include zoning changes, program initiatives. And the strategies can range from just giving a timeline all the way to really allowing folks to drive the development of a street, for example, like we did on Rosemary. And the community outreach for the private sector projects it's held by those private individuals. So a lot of the folks that Rick's team, those external players, they do their own engagement. That's a requirement that Rick's team requires of them before they get their building permits. So we worked with utilities first to do a kind of engagement framework. So you can see here that there's a project initiated, there's a project planning meeting. That's when we sit down together and all determine what the strategy is going to be moving forward. And there's some swim lanes for us. We're currently working on that with engineering and Tanu Penna. On a way to do that with the engineering capital improvements as well. We created a community engagement charter. This will help internally all of us, give us the direction that we're going to go so that we can sit down and know exactly what that engagement's going to look like. And I think about it in terms of this parks bond that we're doing, right? We sat down as a team, we came up with a strategy, we're working that strategy, we're going to meetings, we have weekly meetings to talk about the way this engagement's going, and I think you can see the benefit out in the community. I mean, I've only heard one person that's a little against the park bond. Everybody else is really supportive because they've gotten the information that they needed. Once the strategy's been developed with the project team and the roles and responsibilities, we'll come up with that outreach project, and the feedback will be captured so that we'll be able to feed that to you so you have the information you need to make those decisions. We've also contracted with these 4 groups so that on certain projects like maybe South Dixie, it's bigger than what we want to be able to handle, or what we are able to handle, that we'll have a team of folks that will be able to help us, much like we have the team that's helping us with the Parks Bond. We want the strategy to look more like this, where we're all working together, moving in the same direction, and that strategy is throughout all the different departments collectively. So some of the example strategies that we'll be using are the association meetings. We really want to get out to the public and be out where they are rather than asking them to come in here to us, right? One of the examples I use is the pilot project that we did on 4th Street. You know, when folks are there, we're talking, and that's how we got the design standards for what we want to do on Rosemary going north. And we're allowing the community to actually have input where they live, where they are, rather than having to sit in a meeting in a room. It's a little more engaging for them. We are doing some online and social media surveys, and we're going out to parks and different events. We were at the Sunday on the Waterfront. Unfortunately, it got rained out this week. So we're also looking at some online options. The one we're using right now for the golf course is called Polko. We put it out there to test it, to see how it's going to work, because we don't want to get something that's not going to work for us, right? And one of the interesting things about the Polko survey is it shows you where people have voted. And I think that's going to be real important for you all to be able to make some of the decisions. The mayor gave us a charge and said he wanted to hear from everybody in the city, so that's what we're trying to accomplish. It also helps our team because there are some neighborhoods you can see that there hasn't been any input at all. One of the areas I think that there's been a low response is the RISE initiative area, so that can give our team some input to be able to go out with Craig Glover and his folks to get the actual engagement. Even we've got iPads, we can go out to the community and help them give us the input that the mayor and you all are looking for. It also gives us some other interesting data. It tells us the kinds of folks that are voting and what our subscriber growth is, and then the age of the folks. We're up to 178 votes so far. So my goal is 1,000 because I wanted to get to at least 1% of our public. So that's it for me. If you have any questions, Doug or I'd be happy to answer.
Questions? Commissioner Shove?
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I want to just clarify one thing, and I have one question. One of my clarifications was, how do we engage with equity? And it sounds like you have iPads and you're headed out into the community, so we can engage some of our older populations that may not be linked into social media, et cetera. Great. And then secondly, I know you put up the internal communications charter. So I think one thing that's helpful is setting the tone so the community knows what to expect. So when you order a pizza from Domino's, there's a pizza tracker. It tells you who's making your pizza, when it goes in the oven, when it's out for delivery, and when it gets there. Do we have any kind of project tracking mechanism that's a public tracking mechanism? So if it's a category A project, B project, C project, just for instance, you know, different levels of engagement for different types of projects that we can communicate publicly. Here's the expectation for this level of project. We're going to do these types of engagements and then get to this final decision, whatever that may be.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that we would be doing when we sit around and strategize about how we're going to do engagement is to look at this spectrum and decide based on the types of inputs that we need, where along that spectrum we're going to engage, and then that would be communicated to the public. So that's one way. In terms of the equity piece, yes, definitely. We're trying to meet folks where they're at, and we talked a lot about target population. So whether it's the elderly or Spanish speakers, giving a voice to the voiceless, and that's kind of a term I've been using a lot with our group, because they don't come to public meetings, they don't get a chance to provide input, and so we're going to make an effort to give a voice to the voiceless. But yes, along this spectrum, we will decide and communicate that to the public. This is the type of engagement that we're going to. Sometimes it might just be a door hanger. If we're doing a utilities project, that may be the extent of the engagement. Just let them know this project is happening. Now, throughout that process, we should also let folks know if there's a delay and if there's going to be an extension of the work that's being done on the street. So we've just got to keep the communications open and set the expectation early, as Doug and Wendy mentioned.
And I think there's going to be some projects like, I don't know if today you're hearing from engineering about traffic calming, where a process needs to be put in place and that this is the expectation, this is how it goes, this is what you need to do to get traffic calming in your neighborhood, this is the engagement that you'll expect to get, and that'll be standardized. So I see us moving in that direction where some projects, if it's just a repaving, it's going to be a door hanger, so that the public will start to come to expect this is what your engagement's going to be on that kind of a project.
Sure. Is the intent to make that information available online somewhere where you could look at any project in the city and see where in the engagement process that we are?
I don't know about every project, but we have talked, engineering and specifically is looking at doing a website for larger projects, is that correct? Where there would be a website that each project would kind of have some information on it. So we've definitely talked about that for engineering. I imagine the park bond passes, same thing for some of the parks projects, that we would have that information online and show the progress and show what type of engagement.
That transparency is important, so thank you.
Madam President.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation, and Doug, thank you for being here with us today. I agree. I think that setting expectations was probably number one on your list for a reason. I think that in business life, in any meetings that we go to, we set the expectations of what it is that we look to get out of the meeting, what are our goals, what are our outcomes, what are our timelines, clear next steps. So I agree that we should have some sort of standardized way of making sure that the residents and our stakeholders know what level of participation we're in. And one thing that I've appreciated is that sometimes at our commission presentations, staff has mentioned, oh, this is part of this subsection of our strategic plan, and mentioned that. And so maybe when we're going out for each of these kind of community outreach, or as we take on projects, this could be some way, and we use some coding or something. And I hear what you're saying about the individual projects being on the website, but will there be some information about community engagement and participation just generally on the website so that we can start helping our constituents to understand that we're looking at this process now?
Yes, and we have a community engagement website, so as we're moving forward, we'll create opportunities to show the folks what their participation is. And I'm glad you mentioned the example of the strategic plan or other types of reports that have been done that City Commission has adopted at some point, maybe a couple of years ago. One of the challenges is there may be a plan that's adopted by a city commission, but it may take a couple of years to implement. Same thing with strategic plan initiatives. And so there has to be, at some point, you've got to move forward with what was previously adopted. So I think there needs to be a understanding of that. If there was a process that we went through that hopefully included a lot of community engagement up front, let's say there's some kind of master plan or economic development plan, for example, that then the city commission adopts that. It may take a couple of years to implement, but that we refer back to that plan. And so that gives hopefully the city commission an understanding that this is not coming out of nowhere. There was previous engagement done, and this is how we got to this place that we're in now, and we're asking for a recommendation for a vote. There was already community engagement done, may have been a couple of years ago, but I think we get into this area sometimes where a couple of years later we're coming back with a project that's part of a larger plan, but it gets derailed because there's not the data that supported that it was engagement done before. So we're going to correct that, showing you the data and hopefully keeping that. So a couple of years down the road we can show you there was data on the engagement that was done.
And I think that feeds into how do we identify, I think the term was community values. We may have to do that on more strategic initiatives, whether it's the golf course, whether it's 8111, whether it's Curry Park. How do we start identifying, not so much the specifics of the project itself, but what are some of the core values of either the city or that neighborhood that should guide the thinking as we enter into more specific discussion of the project? I don't know how that's done, and would certainly be open to hearing just a little bit, because we got to move on to other items on the agenda, but a little bit of how that process, that community value identification process, how does that work?
It's really just creating an intentional conversation early in the process, and it's figuring out, you can do this by having a series of meetings throughout your community. You can do this on an online tool. There's lots of different ways to do it. It's really just being very intentional about it, asking very clear questions that are at the values level, driving toward values, getting away from the outcomes, and before people have really started developing their opinions. So lots of different ways to do it. It's not, there's no one way.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Neary, did you have?
Yeah, just a quick comment. I know we're going to move on. First of all, thank you for being here today. So what's interesting about this topic, when I think about it from the commission standpoint, the mayor and the commission standpoint, is we were all elected on our own, personal platforms, right? And that's basically what got us into office. And we're not going to always agree, nor should we always agree. But I think when it comes to this is the one thing that when we miss the boat, doesn't matter who it is on the commission, we really either are a team on this for the good or for the bad. And so I think both in your slide, Wendy, and as you talked about in modeling civility and all of those things, and I think it's just a reminder, it's very helpful to hear this, but a reminder that, if I'm a bad actor on that, the reality is from a commission standpoint, not staff, but from a commission standpoint, we all pay a price in that. So probably overstating what we all know, but I thought that was important to highlight. Thank you.
Madam President.
Thank you. And yeah, actually to that same point, I always keep this in mind when we worked on our mission statement at the last strategic planning session. And Mayor, you mentioned at the opening of this that we're in the business of customer service. That is in our mission statement. It says West Palm Beach delivers exceptional customer service. So my question is, and maybe a plea, and a reminder to this commission as we move into our budgeting and other strategic planning sessions, is that we make sure that this community engagement remains top of mind and top of priority. And my question is, those outreach liaisons that you showed the graphic of in, I think, 9 different areas, is that their sole job, or is that on top of regular duties? Were they, relieved of other duties so that they could handle this? And so that is what I often see happen with communications and marketing efforts, is that it's kind of added on, and then what happens is it gets left behind when other priorities or tasks get added on. And so I just want to make sure that we continue to look at that and look at ways that we can be creative and making sure that we achieve these results.
Yeah, and I'm just going to say, so as an example, one of the people that's a community engagement liaison is Rudy. Rudy is the Parks and Rec community engagement liaison. That's what he does. So he's now just become that person who coordinates in that department the projects, and then, like, they're getting ready to do something down Palmetto, I think. So, hey, Wendy, I need some help doing some engagement. Can we, get in contact with the schools? So he was already in that kind of role. And now it's just kind of the communication piece between that department and us. And then there are times when there's some small thing that he's doing on his own, whether it's a playground scape, and then he's just doing the outreach at his park. So it's kind of like that. Each department director selected their community engagement liaison. The ones that got fed back to me were on that slide. So hopefully that's not going to be an issue going forward.
And the model that we're using is with these community engagement liaisons and the staff that are full-time, Wendy, Jose, and Kevin, is one that we copied from Boulder, Colorado in a lot of ways, which is a similar sized city. and they're about 2 years ahead of us in terms of their effort. But this is going to be a work in progress. Even Boulder is adjusting as they go along. So,
Thank you.
Anything else? Very fine presentation. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Wendy. Armando, thank you for the work you're doing with your team. And please keep us apprised as we continue to tweak this. But this is very valuable service that we're doing to the commissioners, mayor, the commission, as well as the public. Thank you.